Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something that affects everyone, no matter your income, protecting your assets. You sent over a really interesting mix of materials this time.
Yeah.
We've got legal experts, financial planners, and even a Christian perspective on insurance.
It's interesting how we often think of asset protection as something only for the super rich, but these sources really highlight its importance for everyday people. We're talking about lawsuits, accidents, even just planning for a secure financial future.
Right. It's not just about protecting those mega yachts, but
Right.
before we get into the how-to, I think it would help to define what we even mean by assets.
Sure.
Because it's probably broader than most people think.
Absolutely. We tend to think of mansions and yachts, but assets really encompass anything you own that has value.
Okay.
That includes your current income, savings accounts, retirement funds, even future earnings. What's fascinating is that even someone with a modest income needs to consider asset protection.
Okay, so even if I'm not exactly rolling in dough, I still need to think about this. But why? What's the big deal about protecting assets?
Well, think of it like this. You wouldn't wait until your house is on fire to install a smoke detector.
Yeah.
Right? Same goes for protecting your assets. Waiting until a lawsuit hits is way too late. You need a plan in place beforehand, as sort of legal fortress to safeguard what you've worked hard for.
All right, I'm getting the protect your castle analogy here, but let's talk specifics.
Okay.
What are the first steps to building this so-called fortress?
Our sources suggest a layered approach. The first layer, and it's often overlooked, is what some call free protection.
Okay.
Legal safeguards already in place depending on where you live.
So basically freebies from the legal system. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
A big one is the homestead exemption.
Okay.
A lot of states have laws protecting a certain amount of equity in your primary home from creditors in some places like Florida. It's unlimited. Imagine you win the lottery, buy a multi-million-dollar mansion, and it's entirely shielded.
Wow. Okay, that is a pretty significant freebie, and it gets applied automatically.
Often, yes. No special paperwork needed. It's basically built-in protection. And then there are things like protected retirement accounts.
Whoa.
401ks, for example, offer some level of protection from creditors, especially in bankruptcy situations. Even some types of life insurance can help shield assets depending on your state's laws.
Okay, so step one is checking out what free protection I already have, then what?
Then we layer on insurance.
Okay.
Many of the experts we're looking at emphasize this as the first line of defense against potential liabilities. Auto insurance, homeowners, and especially umbrella insurance. These are essential.
I actually remember one source had a story about a cleaning person slipping on ice and suing the homeowner.
Right. The homeowner's basic insurance only covered a fraction of the lawsuit because they didn't have an umbrella policy. They ended up having to sell their home to cover the rest. It's a stark reminder that inadequate insurance can have truly devastating consequences.
That is a scary thought. So, free protection plus insurance equals the foundation of our fortress.
That's right.
What comes next?
Layer 3 is a bit more strategic, and it's all about privacy, making it tough for potential creditors to even find your assets in the first place.
Hold on, is that even possible? I feel like with all the data and online records, everything is trackable these days.
It's definitely more challenging, but there are legal and ethical ways to maintain a degree of privacy with your assets.
Yeah.
It's about making yourself a less appealing target, especially for those lawyers who work on contingency.
Okay.
Meaning they only get paid if they win.
Okay.
If they think you're not worth going after, they might not even bother.
So it's like a preemptive defense strategy,
That's right.
making it seem like there's nothing there to take. I like it.
Exactly. And this is where some of the free protection we talked about comes into play. Remember the homestead exemption in states with unlimited protection? Even if a lawyer knows you own a mansion, they might be deterred because they know they can't touch it.
Okay, so it's not just about being secretive, but about strategically leveraging these legal protections.
Right.
What are some other ways to boost privacy?
One important tactic is being mindful of what you share publicly, especially online. It might seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people inadvertently expose their assets on social media or boast about their financial successes to casual acquaintances.
So no more Instagram photos of your new sports car.
Exactly. Maintaining a low profile and being discreet about your financial situation can go a long way in deterring unwanted attention.
Right. It's like that saying, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. In this case, the less you reveal, the less likely you are to become a target.
Precisely. And there are other practical steps you can take, using a P.O. box for sensitive mail. Being cautious about co-signing loans and avoiding unnecessary debt can all help reduce your financial footprint.
Okay, so we've got free protection, insurance, and privacy. Those first three layers seem like a solid foundation for protecting assets. But I'm guessing there's more, especially for people with more complex financial situations.
You're right, we've covered the basics. But the next level takes things a step further. This is where we start looking at entity structures and more advanced strategies, often associated with the wealthy, but the principles can apply to anyone.
All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this next level of asset protection.
Well, it starts with understanding that separating your personal assets from your business assets is crucial. Legal entities like LLCs and limited partnerships come into play here.
Okay, so instead of just being John Smith with a bank account, I could create a separate legal entity for my business.
Exactly. Think of it like creating a separate compartment for your business finances. Let's say you're a plumber. Instead of operating as John Smith, you form John's Plumbing LLC. Now, if there's a liability, say a burst pipe floods a client's house, the lawsuit is against John's Plumbing LLC, not against you personally.
Okay.
This separation helps prevent creditors from reaching your personal bank account, house, or other assets.
That makes sense. So forming an LLC is like putting a shield between your business and your personal life. Are there other benefits to these structures?
There are some states offer greater anonymity and stronger legal protection when it comes to LLCs. Forming your company in a state like Wyoming, for example, can provide an extra layer of privacy because they don't require the disclosure of beneficial owners.
So strategically choosing where you incorporate your business can actually make a difference in protecting your assets. Interesting, but I'm guessing LLCs are just one piece of this next level puzzle, right?
Right.
What other strategies do people use to take asset protection a step further?
You're right. LLCs are just one tool. Another powerful strategy is using trusts. But this is where things can get a bit more complex. Trusts are often associated with the wealthy, but the underlying principles can be useful for anyone seeking greater asset protection.
From what I've read, trusts can be a bit of a maze.
Sure.
Different types, different purposes. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Can you break it down a bit?
Absolutely. Think of a trust as a legal vault for your assets managed by a trusted professional who fends off creditors during legal trouble. There are different types of trust, each with its own set of rules and benefits. Some are designed for specific purposes like estate planning or charitable giving, while others are specifically for asset protection.
So it's like choosing the right lock for your vault door depending on what you're trying to protect. I'm starting to get the picture, but what about all those stories you hear about offshore trusts? Are those just for billionaires trying to hide money?
Offshore trusts definitely have a certain mystique about them. But the truth is, they're not just for the super rich. They're chosen because jurisdictions like the Cook Islands or Nevis have particularly strong asset protection laws and typically don't recognize foreign judgments. So if someone sues you in the U.S. and your assets are held in a trust in the Cook Islands, the U.S. court's ruling might not be enforceable there.
That sounds like a pretty powerful way to shield assets, but I'm guessing setting up and managing an offshore trust isn't exactly a DIY project, right?
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to work with experienced professionals when dealing with trusts, especially offshore trusts. These are complex legal structures with significant tax implications, and getting it wrong can have serious consequences.
Okay, so trusts, whether domestic or offshore, are like the high security vault in our asset protection fortress. What else do we need to know about this next level of protection?
Well, there's one more strategy that's even more sophisticated. It's called equity stripping. And to understand it, you need to think like a bank.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me how to think like a bank.
Think about how banks use liens when they give you a mortgage. They have a legal claim on your property until the loan is paid. Equity stripping works similarly, but you're essentially becoming your own bank. You strategically borrow against your own assets, reducing the equity available to creditors.
So if I own a property worth $1 million and I take out a big loan against it, the amount a creditor could seize is reduced.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that the lender holding that loan has first dibs if the asset needs to be sold. So while equity stripping can be effective, it's a complex strategy with potential tax implications, and it's definitely something to discuss with experienced professionals.
Okay, so we've got LLCs, trusts, and even equity stripping. This next level is sounding pretty intense, but it seems like a lot of this is geared towards people with significant wealth. Is there anything here that applies to someone who's not exactly a millionaire?
Absolutely. The key takeaway is that the principles behind these advanced strategies can be applied at any level, Even if you're not dealing with millions of dollars, understanding the importance of asset separation, liability protection, and strategic planning is incredibly valuable.
So even if my castle is more of a cozy cottage, I can still benefit from thinking about these concepts.
Exactly. It's about being proactive and taking reasonable steps to safeguard what you've worked hard to achieve, regardless of the size of your financial portfolio. And remember, we talked about that Christian perspective on asset protection.
Right.
It emphasizes responsible stewardship and managing risk in a way that aligns with your values. It's not just about hoarding wealth, but about protecting your family, your future, and being able to use your resources wisely.
That's a great point. It's not about being paranoid or obsessed with money, but about being responsible and having a plan. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive. I'm definitely starting to see why asset protection is so important for everyone, not just the wealthy elite.
It's been a great discussion.
It has.
And we've just scratched the surface in part 2. We'll delve even deeper into specific strategies and tools you can use to build your own asset protection fortress.
I'm ready to fortify my castle. See you in part 2.
See you there.
Welcome back to our deep dive on asset protection.
Glad to be back. We've covered a lot of ground so far, from defining assets and liabilities to exploring different layers of protection. Now let's get more into the practical side. What are some specific strategies people can actually use to safeguard their wealth?
Exactly. Let's get down to brass tacks. We talked about those free protection options in part 1. I'm curious to hear more about how those work in practice.
A great place to start is with homestead exemptions. They're surprisingly powerful for protecting your primary residence.
Right. We learned that some states like Florida offer unlimited homestead protection, meaning no matter how much your home is worth, it can't be touched by creditors.
Exactly. That's a huge advantage for those who've built up significant equity over time. But even in states with more limited homestead exemptions, it can still be a significant safety net. It's definitely worth investigating the specific laws in your state.
And the best part is it often applies automatically, right? You don't have to file any special paperwork.
That's right. It's essentially built-in protection. And then there are protected retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs. These often have some level of protection in case of bankruptcy, but the specifics vary depending on the type of account and state laws.
It seems like understanding those details could be really important. Like if you borrow against your 401k, you might lose some of that protection, right?
That's a great point. It's not a blanket guarantee. It's all about knowing the specific rules and limitations. And speaking of details, let's revisit insurance. We talked about it being the first line of defense, especially when it comes to liability protection. Auto, homeowners, and umbrella insurance should be cornerstones of any asset protection plan.
I remember one of the experts we looked at, Ian Corzine, talked about a specific type of business insurance called CGL insurance, or commercial general liability insurance.
Right. CGL insurance provides broad coverage for businesses, protecting them from a whole variety of liabilities, customer accidents, copyright infringement, even things like slander. It's designed to be a financial safety net in case something goes wrong.
He even mentioned it could cover false arrest situations, which caught my attention.
Me too. Apparently can protect businesses if their employees are wrongfully accused of acting like law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
You never know what kind of legal issues might come up. So having that comprehensive coverage can be crucial.
It's a better safe than sorry kind of thing. Okay, so we've got our free protection, our insurance is sorted. What's next in building our asset protection fortress?
Well, we move on to layer 3, privacy. Remember, it's not about being secretive or hiding from the IRS. It's about making yourself a less appealing target for frivolous lawsuits. Many lawyers work on contingency, meaning they only get paid if they win. If they can't easily find assets to seize, they might not even take the case.
So it's like creating a financial scarecrow, nothing to see here, move along.
I like that analogy. And one way to enhance privacy is through trusts, like we discussed earlier. Trusts can help obscure the true ownership of assets, making them harder to track down.
We also talked about using entity structures like LLCs in states that offer greater anonymity, like Wyoming.
Exactly. Wyoming LLCs are known for their privacy features. They don't require disclosure of the beneficial owners, making it much harder for someone to pierce that corporate veil and figure out who's really behind the company.
Okay, so trusts and strategically formed LLCs can help boost privacy. Any other practical tips for making your financial footprint less visible?
Being mindful of what you share publicly is key. It's about keeping a low profile and not attracting unwanted attention. Don't flaunt your wealth on social media. Be careful who you talk to about your finances, those kinds of things.
It's almost like that saying, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. In this case, the less you reveal, the less likely you are to become a target. Discretion can be a real asset when it comes to protecting your wealth.
Absolutely. So we've talked about free protection insurance and privacy, all essential components of any asset protection plan. Now, are you ready to move up to the next level?
I'm ready to bring on the advanced strategies.
All right, then let's talk about entity structures, specifically LLCs and limited partnerships. We've already touched on LLCs, but how about limited partnerships or LPs? How do those work?
To be honest, I'm a bit fuzzy on the difference between LLCs and LPs.
Well, they're similar in that they offer liability protection, separating business assets from personal assets. But the key difference is that LPs have two types of partners, general partners and limited partners.
Okay, I'm listening. How do those different partners fit into the asset protection picture?
General partners have more control over the business, but they also have unlimited liability. That means their personal assets are at risk if the business is sued. Limited partners, on the other hand, have limited liability. Their personal assets are protected, but they also have less control over the day-to-day operations.
So if I wanted to invest in a business but minimize my personal risk, becoming a limited partner in an LP could be a good option.
It's definitely worth considering. But as with any legal structure, it's best to consult with professionals, a lawyer, a tax advisor, to determine what's best for your situation.
Right. Never go it alone when it comes to this stuff. Speaking of consulting professionals, let's talk about those asset protection trusts. We touched on them earlier, but when should someone actually consider this level of protection?
Trusts are powerful tools, but they're not for everyone. They're typically reserved for individuals with significant wealth who are facing higher levels of risk.
We learned about domestic trusts often set up in states like Nevada or Alaska, and then there are those offshore trusts in places like the Cook Islands and Nevis. How do you decide which type of trust is right for you?
That's a great question, and it really depends on several factors. The amount of assets you're protecting, the types of risks you face, your overall goals. All of that comes into play. And of course, working with an expert who specializes in asset protection trusts is crucial. They can help you navigate the complexities and make sure you're choosing the right structure.
Right. This is not the time for DIY legal maneuvering. One thing that really stood out to me about offshore trusts was their reputation for really strong asset protection laws and their reluctance to recognize foreign judgments. It seems like they offer that extra layer of security.
That's certainly the perception, and there's a lot of truth to it. But it's important to remember that offshore trusts come with complex legal and tax considerations, and they can be expensive to set up and maintain. It's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Definitely sounds like you need expert guidance to wade through those waters.
Okay, so we've got LLCs, LPs, trusts. What's next on our advanced strategies list?
Well, there's that final layer we talked about earlier, equity stripping. It's a pretty sophisticated technique where you use debt to actually protect assets. I know that might sound counterintuitive, but it can be quite effective in certain situations.
Yeah, I remember you comparing it to how banks use liens. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. Think about it this way. When you get a mortgage, the bank has a lien on your property, meaning they have a legal claim on it until the loan is paid off. Equity stripping works similarly, but you're essentially becoming your own bank. You strategically borrow against your own assets, reducing the equity available to creditors.
So if I own a property worth $1 million and I take out a loan for $700,000 against it, my equity is reduced to $300,000. If someone sues me, they can only go after that $300,000. Is that how it works? That's the basic idea. But it's important to note that the lender holding that loan has priority over any other creditors. So if the property is sold to satisfy a judgment, the lender gets paid first.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not about eliminating all risk, but about shifting and minimizing it strategically. It seems like these advanced strategies, trusts, entity structures, equity stripping, are really geared towards people with a lot of wealth. Are there any takeaways here for those of us who aren't in the high net worth category?
Absolutely. The principles behind these strategies can be applied at any level, even if you're not dealing with millions of dollars. Understanding the concepts of asset separation, liability protection, and strategic planning can be incredibly beneficial.
It's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Taking proactive steps to protect your assets, even on a smaller scale, can save you a lot of headaches down the road.
That's a great point. It's not about being paranoid or obsessed with money. It's about being responsible and taking reasonable steps to safeguard what you've worked hard to achieve. Remember that Christian perspective we discussed earlier. It's about being a good steward of the resources you have and managing them wisely to protect your family, your future, and your ability to use those resources for good.
Right. It's not about hoarding wealth, but about protecting what matters most. So As we wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, what's the key message you want listeners to take away?
Asset protection is a journey, not a destination. It's about understanding your risks, exploring your options, and creating a plan that provides you with peace of mind no matter where you are on your financial journey.
And it's never too early to start right. Even small steps like maximizing those free protection options or reviewing your insurance coverage can make a big difference in the long run.
Absolutely. Remember, asset protection isn't just for the wealthy. It's for anyone who wants to safeguard their financial well-being.
Great advice. Join us for part 3, where we'll continue our exploration of asset protection, diving into some common misconceptions, and providing practical tips for building your own financial fortress.
I'm looking forward to it. See you then.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's the final part of our exploration into protecting assets.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From the basics to some pretty advanced strategies.
We've learned that asset protection is so much more than just hiding money.
Yeah.
It's about strategic planning, legal tools, and even aligning your financial decisions with your values.
Right. And in this final part, I think it would be helpful to address some of the common misconceptions people have about asset protection. One of the biggest ones is that it's only for the super rich.
I think we've debunked that myth pretty thoroughly by now, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Asset protection is relevant for anyone who wants to safeguard what they've worked hard to build, regardless of their income level.
Right.
Remember, lawsuits, accidents, unforeseen events, they can happen to anyone. Having a plan in place can make all the difference.
Another misconception I've heard is that asset protection is all about being secretive or evading taxes, almost like you're trying to pull a fast one on the authorities.
That's a dangerous misunderstanding. Ethical asset protection is about using legal and responsible strategies to protect your wealth, not about hiding it from legitimate authorities.
So it's about playing by the rules, but being smart about how you structure your finances.
Exactly. Transparency and compliance are crucial. Asset protection is about minimizing risk, not about avoiding responsibility.
Okay, so for someone listening who's thinking, this all sounds great, but where do I even begin? What's the first step they should take?
I always recommend starting with a thorough assessment of your current situation. What assets do you have? What are your risks? What are your goals? Once you have a clear understanding of your starting point, you can start exploring the options that make the most sense for you.
And don't be afraid to seek professional guidance, right? This stuff can get complex, and having expert advice is crucial.
Absolutely. A qualified attorney who specializes in asset protection can help you navigate the legal and tax implications, make sure you're making informed decisions, and create a plan tailored to your needs.
It's like that saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Investing in professional advice up front can save you a lot of headaches and potential financial losses down the road.
I couldn't agree more. So we've talked about the misconceptions, the first steps. Now let's get into some practical tips for actually building your own asset protection fortress. We've discussed all these different layers. How do you put it all together into a cohesive plan?
It's like building a house. You need that strong foundation, and then each layer is carefully constructed to make sure it's stable and resilient.
Great analogy. And just like building a house, you start with the foundation in this case. That means maximizing your free protection options. Understand the homestead exemption laws in your state. Take advantage of any protections for retirement accounts and life insurance. Those are your building blocks.
Then we add the next layer, insurance, making sure you have adequate auto and homeowners insurance. Considering an umbrella policy for extra liability protection, don't underestimate how important that safety net is.
Right. Insurance is often overlooked, but it's absolutely crucial. Then think about incorporating those privacy-enhancing strategies we talked about, trusts. LLCs, especially in states that offer greater anonymity, those can add another layer of defense.
And remember, privacy isn't about being shady or hiding something. It's about minimizing your visibility to potential litigants, making yourself less of a target.
Exactly. Then moving up the ladder of protection, consider whether entity structures like LLCs or limited partnerships are a good fit for your business ventures. Those could be very effective in shielding your personal assets from business liabilities.
And for those with significant wealth or facing higher levels of risk, consulting with an expert about asset protection trusts, domestic or offshore, might be worth considering.
Absolutely. Trusts are powerful tools, but they're not right for everyone. Getting expert advice is essential. And finally, remember that asset protection isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process. As your life changes, your assets grow, the legal landscape evolves, you'll need to revisit and adjust your plan.
It's like tending a garden. You have to nurture it, adapt, make sure your strategies continue to thrive.
I love that asset protection isn't just about building walls, it's about cultivating a financial ecosystem that supports your long-term well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listener to remember?
Asset protection isn't a luxury. It's a necessity in today's world by taking proactive steps to safeguard your wealth. You're not only protecting your financial future, but also giving yourself the freedom to live with greater peace of mind.
And it's never too early to start right. Even small steps can make a big difference.
Exactly. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
That's a great note to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into asset protection. We hope you found it informative and empowering.
It's been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, we'll see you next time on the deep dive, where we'll explore another fascinating topic and help you uncover hidden insights and valuable knowledge. Until then, stay curious and keep diving deeper.